Hello and welcome to the Devoted Outdoorsman Podcast. Hello, Devoted Nation. I hope you guys had an awesome week and you're ready for this week's podcast. It has been awesome in Oklahoma this week. The weather has been so nice. I've been outside working out a couple days this week and it was just awesome. So, we're going to be talking with Nick Percy this week. Nick is the owner of Killer Food Plots. He has a vast knowledge when it comes to deer nutrition and food plots, seeds, all kinds of information like that, and I think you guys are going to enjoy it. So I hope you guys enjoy this week's podcast. Let's get this thing started.
So hello, Podcast Nation. Today on the podcast, we're going to speak with Nick Percy from Killer Food Plots. He is going to talk to us a little bit about how he prepares and how he would suggest people prepare for spring food plots. Nick, with people being all across the country, how do you suggest food plot preparation to people when you're talking to someone that may be from Michigan like you are, or from Florida or other states like that?
Well, one of the very first things that we encourage people to do is a soil sample. You know, the soil sample establishes the blueprint of what is going on in your soil and allows you to make the corrections that are needed in order to optimize the plant's ability to get the nutrients and all that's necessary to grow the plant out of the ground. So a 7.0 pH allows 100% of a $100 investment into fertilizer to be available to the plant, for instance. Whereas you start dropping down in the pH to be more acidic, when you drop to 6, you're only about 80% of your $80 of your $100 available to the plant. Pretty quick, just that much of a change, and you've already justified your $20 soil test kit in order to find that out and then be able to make those corrections. You continue to drop further down, and you get down to about 5.5, about 50% of your money. You drop to 5.5, and you're down to $46 of your investment into your $100 fertilizer is actually available to the plant. It's pretty wasteful and not a platform for setting up successful food plotting for sure.
So when you're looking at these soil samples, are there certain things that you're looking for other than just the pH balance?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's definitely different levels that you're targeting in your soil test results. One of the most important things that people often overlook, and I'll go through the different details of a soil test, but one thing that's overlooked quite often is the organic level of the soil. And now the organic level of the soil really plays into the soil's ability to hold moisture, nutrients, and to keep things suspended in the soil. So when you're dealing with places like Michigan with our extremely sandy soil, and there's several states around us that are the same, or you're down in Florida with a similar situation, real sandy, poor quality soil, not a lot of organic matter to hold, it's very difficult to grow a successful food plot. Same thing is true in heavy gravel. When you are challenged with your organic matter, one of the fastest ways you can build the organic matter is to actually do a controlled burn. Unfortunately, most people don't have the luxury of doing a controlled burn. So we have, as part of our makeup of our Groganics hydration and our Groganics fusion fertilizer, we have organic matter within that mix to help people compensate and to start to build their organic matter up.
So what would you suggest to someone that, let's say, does live in Michigan? What is the optimal time of the year to start your spring food plots?
Well, the optimum time to plant spring food plots is when the ground temperature gets to be about 60 degrees at night. And the reason for that is really if you're trying to grow a legume. So a lot of people like to plant soybeans or climbing peas or different types of legumes. And a legume will germ, a pea or a bean will germ pretty quickly, meaning it it will sprout its little root and get established. The problem is that if we fluctuate between the warmer air temperature throughout the day and the cooler night temperatures without ground temperature that can support that new sprouted root from that legume, a lot of times they mold over because of that drastic temperature change. And when they mold, that will kill the new germinated seedling. So pretty important to have close to 60-degree ground temperature at night as you can when you're doing legumes. Now, some of your other plantings, we've been talking quite a bit about frost seeding. And so frost seeding up in the northern country, even north of us in Canada, frost seeding is still an option, but the frost is coming out of the ground pretty rapidly down in mid-state and further south. So we're kind of past that frost seeding point, but that is a great opportunity if you have a clean food plot, meaning you planted a brassica in the fall and you don't have the weeds and the grass issues. You can broadcast your resurrection clover, your chicory, our KFB chicory, or our cold play mix out over the snow, a little bit of snow that's left, and as the frost begins to heave out or push out of the soil, followed by more snow and rain and more heaving, that seed works itself into the top surface of the soil with help from Mother Nature and gets established ahead of all the other grass and weeds that have the potential to take off. And it gives a very early high-protein food source for your whitetails to help their bodies start to rebound from the stresses of winter.
So that would be beneficial for someone like myself that doesn't necessarily have a lot of equipment, and it costs money to rent the equipment to get your food plots ready. So if it was possible for you to plant brassicas in the wintertime, you could come back early spring or when, it starts tapering into spring and go ahead and do a planting like that, like broadcast, like you were saying, your clover or your chicory out into it.
That's correct. Yep. It's definitely an easy way to do it. One of the other benefits of planting a food plot that way is every time you work up disc or rototill the soil, you're essentially breaking down organic matter. And as you allow that food plot to establish itself, especially if you're using the organics, we have a climbing, vining, healthy fungi that is also a part of our organics, and it creates kind of a spider webbing effect in the soil to hold and grab moisture and nutrients. Like if you get a big spider web on your front porch of your house and you look at that thing and you think, man, that doesn't have any holding capacity. You touch it with your finger, it kind of just vaporizes. But if you leave it alone and it rains and you look at how much water spiderweb is capable of holding, you're thinking, man, I'm just waiting for that thing to fall apart, but it's holding that water. Well, that fungi in the soil, or that's in our organics, when it gets in the soil, I refer to it in the spiderweb effect. It's literally that fine, and it creeps and crawls throughout your soil, creating layers just like that spiderweb would do. And it also pre-tunnels the soil. And so it's collecting the moisture and nutrients. So in sandy gravel or in a clay type soil, the benefit is that it's tunneling and it's creating oxygen flow through the soil, just like it does in your lighter soils. But in addition, it's grabbing the moisture and nutrients and keeping it suspended so it's available to the new plant. And what we're finding with a lot of our clover, our resurrection clover, which would normally be a 3 to 4 inch root structure, we're actually putting down, 7, 8, as much as 10 inches of root development. And that's phenomenal for drought tolerant, in a high protein food source.
So once you broadcast your clover into your existing food plot and it grows, let's say it makes it through the summer and everything, is that something that you're going to leave in clover, or are you going to go ahead and broadcast something into it again in the fall?
Well, that depends. After you've frost-seeded your clover, for instance, and it gets established, one of the first things you need to do in the spring is you need to come in and fertilize it. Clover produces nitrogen, so it doesn't really need a whole lot of nitrogen. Our Organics does a really good job because it replenishes so many other things, as I mentioned earlier, micronutrients, carbon, the calcium is important for tissue development and root development. The additional fungi packages we have, the healthy bacteria to go along with that fungi, the minerals and the organic matter, and that continues to work into the soil. If, for instance, you frost seeded a clover plot, after it gets up a couple inches, you're going to want to go in there and you're going to want to fertilize it once the weather breaks and you can get onto that soil so you're not damaging or creating big ruts with your tractor or your quad or whatever. And then as the season progresses, you'll want to fertilize it one more time in the summer. And then when we get to the fall, a lot of times at half rate, so if you had a half an acre, we'd take a quarter acre of our Carnage brassicas or our deepwood, and we would broadcast in in either late July or to mid-August time frame, even as late as Labor Day weekend up here in Michigan. We would broadcast either the deepwoods or the Carnage in over the top of the clover, and then I would take a couple passes and cut it roughly 3 inches off the top of the clover. At that point, kind of create a little bit of kind of thatch, if you will, debris that falls down in between the plants, and then I would roll it with a cultipacker or a yard roller. And you don't have to worry about hurting your clover if you roll it like that. But what that would do is it would make sure you had good seed soil contact. It would create some loose green debris that would cover the seed and hold more moisture in the ground to assure that those zero grains and brassicas and the kale, for instance, and the Carnage brassicas would germinate quickly and then would produce a subsequent high carbohydrate food source along with your protein food source from your resurrection clover.
So do you prefer the clover over the chicory for a scenario like that?
No, not necessarily. In fact, the chicory, I call it the money plot. It goes in every one of my management plans regardless of what state I'm managing in. We manage in 26 states throughout the U.S., so it's, and the reason for that is the chicory puts down about a 14 to 16 inch taproot, the size of your pinky, once it's established. So it's extremely drought tolerant, and it produces, our chicory produces 40+% protein, and it's an extremely thin leaf. It's almost it's like almost an opaque leaf, and which is very important in supporting the whitetail's ability to break it down and to extract that high protein from the plant, as well as the other vitamins and minerals in the plant, so that they really truly benefit from it. I like to blend the chicory and the clover together to continue that thought. I will take our resurrection clover and our chicory and I'll blend it. So if I were to purchase a bag of our KFC chicory, it's a 1 acre bag, and then I have a half an acre bag of our res clover, and I like to blend the two of them together in an acre. And the reason I do that is that the chicory has the opportunity to protect the clover during the hot drought or hot temperatures in Oklahoma. You guys are going to see in excess of 100 degrees for 15 to 20 days, I think you had last year. And what the chicory will do with that deep taproot is it'll stay into the moisture level, and the clover can hide up behind its larger leaf production and assure that it stays green and available for your whitetails. If it were out there by itself in the wide open sun, the reality is that it would probably start to get pretty cooked in that hot sun and start to brown up and curl up and go dormant, and or just completely kill the plant depending on how hot and how dry it is for how long. And that would be on a newer clover plot. Clover can handle some pretty high heat for a period of time, but we found last year in just our straight clover plots out in Oklahoma, a couple of our teams from out there, Fired Up Outdoors, and one of the other teams, that the plots that were planted with the killer food plot chicory and clover, they did much better at sustaining that 100+ degree temps, and I believe it was like 20 straight days you guys had that, pretty close to it, that those plots remained alive. It didn't kill them. In fact, the chicory went kind of crazy and was growing really well, and they were having a lot of deer activity in those plots because everything else pretty much burned up. And the plots that were just straight clover that were new, that were in some partial shade, they fared pretty well even in those high temps. But the ones that were out in the direct sun that were brand new plots, those eventually gave it up after 20 days of 100+ degrees, or at least they went dormant. It didn't kill them dead, but they eventually came back in the spring, or in the fall, I should say, after that hot summer, and it didn't kill them completely dead. They just regrew from the roots later. They went dormant. So
Yeah, it definitely gets warm here in Oklahoma in the summertime. And like you said, some years it will be, 20 plus days where, it's 100 degrees at some point in the day. And it's pretty ridiculous. So it can be very hard on your food plots. And I'm going to be kind of selfish here for a second and talk a little bit about one of the properties that I've got onto here recently. It has about an 80-acre soybean field on it. So last year was the first year that we had permission on this land. And so we never really got into food plots because we had this large soybean field. So we thought, that'll be enough to hold them in there, and we'll have some feeders here and there. Well, it turns out as soon as they cut the soybeans out, there's nothing there for the deer anymore, so the deer leave. And that's why, we've kind of gone through this process of wanting to plant something this fall.
Yeah, so that's a pretty common concern that people have is, the agriculture does definitely hold the deer throughout the spring and summer months, and definitely supplements Mother Nature's food sources. What is important though is you need to have some bridge gap food sources, if you will. And the clover and the chicory, our cold play mix, which is actually a turkey and whitetail blend that has our KFT alfalfa and some clovers, as well as a couple of annual food sources in it. Those three are solid staples in the area of protein, and Mother Nature produces about 10 to 12% on average from any kind of natural, or I guess we'll call it native food source, green forage in the woods. And that depends on what state you're in and what's happening, but on average about 10 to 12%, which is considerably lower than what a whitetail needs to truly achieve its full genetic potential. And that's very, very important to supplement protein, come alongside Mother Nature, not replace her, but just come alongside of her to assure that your whitetails are seeing somewhere between 18 and 22% protein every day. And the clover, the chicory, alfalfa, the soybeans that you mentioned, those are usually mid-20s protein. Climbing vine and peas, or KFT climbing vine and pea, and our forage soybeans do not produce pods, but they produce extremely thin leaf, very digestible stems and branching off of the plants, and those are a mid-20s green protein food source. So some combination of protein alongside will give you a really good food source between that transition between the farmer's fields being there and going away and bridging into the later season where the carbohydrates are going to be a number one target. Proteins make about 80% of a whitetail's diet, with 20% of other. That switches in the fall and especially into the winter months where, a whitetail's diet is going to consist of mostly, somewhere between 60 and 80% carbohydrates when available. And that is giving them their daily energy. It's helping to continue to build their fat reserves when they have it in abundance. And when you have a good, solid, late season food source in your rape, your radishes, your turnips, sugar beets, those type of high carbohydrate producing plants, you're generally going to have some of the biggest deer in the area because they need the groceries to recover from rut and to help sustain them on a daily basis.
With that being said, let's move into a different type of conversation here. So let's say someone has never really done a food plot before. Obviously, we've previously covered they should get a soil sample, and they're looking for that 7% pH balance, and that would be ideal for the perfect soil. Once they get that kind of taken care of, a summertime type food plot would be like you were saying is a soybean or something along those lines. And then they could potentially use that same food plot all year round, just continuously planting.
Yeah, we have a couple different ways that we approach food plots for spring and summer. We have one blend that is really important is our killer food plot climbing binding pea. It produces an extremely thin, small, tender leaf, as well as the entire plant is actually edible, the vine and all. And the leaves from the peas are one of the very first food sources that your fawns are going to be able to not only eat them, but actually digest them in their system to gain some significant protein and food value, as opposed to just being roughage going in one end and out the other. It's really important when they're weaned off of mom.
So your Killer Food Plots company, that kind of came around, as my understanding was, you kind of were a manager of a wildlife reserve, and you kind of came up with your seed mixes and the plans that you have for what the company is today, correct?
Yeah, well, I started actually doing food plots for my buddies. I was a big fisherman back in the day, but I had a green thumb, and my buddies said to me, hey, would you try and grow some food plots? And I said, food plots, what are those all about? And they explained that for the deer, and, it made sense to me. And so I messed around with it for a few years and failed miserably for the first couple of years, and then I got hooked up with a rather large seed company that was new on the scene and definitely looked at things different. I was just super intrigued by what they were doing and the opportunity to learn. So I invested in my own gas money, my own time, my own energy, if you will, and I drove down south to learn as much as I could and absorb as much as I could. Really learned a ton. Definitely grateful to, my fellow brothers in that business, and they taught me a ton, and I had some really great opportunities. I'm an engineer by trade, and my brain really never shuts off, but I saw some opportunities for some things, and one of the first customers that I had back in the day, I wasn't growing in the best soil conditions here in Michigan, and so we were struggling to get the deer for the food plots to grow, and then we were really struggling for the deer to come to the food plots, and we didn't understand how important the proper forage was and the digestibility of that forage. And it might look good, but it's not necessarily preferred by a whitetail. And so one of the things is I wanted to raise my own whitetail and have my own test specimens. So it was an interesting process and evolution over a few years, and got involved in raising deer and had some opportunities to really study our deer compared to what they were eating, and get involved in that from that perspective, and start to evolve our food, our seed species into ultimately what they are today. One of the other big challenges in food plotting is, you have to build the soil, you have to plant the right species of plant, and maybe to kind of further explain that before I go on to talk about screening and why that's important. There's different types of brassicas, there's just different types of turnouts, different types of clover out there, and they're not all the same, and they're not certainly the quality of that species. We have several different killer food plot specific species that you'll see within our blends, and those are really grown to maximize the genetic potential, or the digestibility and the usability by your whitetails, so they're minimizing the waste. What I found early on in raising whitetails is a lot of what goes in one end of a whitetail goes out the other side the way it went in, right? It's just roughage and just passes through. And part of that is the result of whitetails have a pretty inefficient digestive system in that they use bacteria to break down their food, and they don't take very long, or they don't spend a lot of time trying to break down the food they take in before they push it out. And so it's a very inefficient system, so it's really critical that we try to bolster or improve the quality of the forage they're taking in. And a lot of the whitetail makeup of what the type of food that they want to eat, it has to be easily broken down in their system and extracting the vitamins, minerals, proteins, carbohydrates. So thin is better, like thin leaf, thin stem versus big rubbery cabbage leaf on your brassicas, for instance. You don't want waxy finishes on the leaf and on the edible matter of the plant. You want it to be more like a well-steamed piece of broccoli, still fibrous, and it breaks down in your mouth, which a lot of our KFP species plants are geared towards, as opposed to an undercooked piece of asparagus, right? It's kind of stringy and woody, and that ends up just being, filler for the deer going in one end and out the other.
So you're not telling me that you've tried to eat some of your food plots before, have you?
Yeah, we snack on a few things once in a while. Radishes, though, you don't want to pick them up when they're small because they're pretty hot. But yeah, I've been known to be hungry in my tree stand doing an all-day sit and decide to get down and rip one out of the ground, dust it off, and carve a few pieces off and eat it. But no, we really did focus on that more from a desirability from our deer, but also their ability to use it and then what was it doing to their body. You know, when you raise deer in a high fence, you have the luxury of being able to do studies on your deer, to see their weight gain, to see their fawn development, how long are the lactation cycle, how big are the fawns, how well are those fawns doing, come October 1st, there's a measurable period of time between birth and that point to see, how are their bodies developing and are they really where they should be. And we really focus heavily in high fence on your doe because your doe are transferring 70% plus of your genetic into your next generation of buck and doe fawn, but they're also maintaining the life of that fawn prior to birth and then post birth through their lactation cycle. And the bacteria there is within the milk those fawns are drinking in. That is kickstarting their digestive system. That bacteria kickstarts their own stomach to start functioning. And it's a very slow process. And, as inefficient as a whitetail can be when they're in their optimum condition, it's pretty tough on a fawn if they lose their mother or, most of the times they don't make it unless they're adopted by another doe. It's really important to take care of your does and to make sure that they're in their peak operating performance. And that's not to say that you neglect your bucks. You certainly don't. But what I can tell you is that bucks that are on their feet today will never be as big as the bucks that come in future years as you make an investment into the health of your does. And the fawn birth weight's higher, the lactation cycles are longer, and then when you're putting in the right habitat, the quality food, and late season food plots, for instance, should be by cover. Those are important things as well. So to keep the deer, minimize their stress levels in the winter months when you live in states where it's nasty cold and inches and inches of snow, it makes a huge difference in how your deer are coming out of the winter into spring, for instance. And so those are things you want to consider when establishing a habitat plan and establishing bedding on a property. Where are your late season food plots in relationship to that? So there's a lot of different things that, go into a properly managed property, and food plots are definitely a piece of the bigger picture.
So Killer Food Plots not only make feeds, they also have a supplement, correct?
Yeah, we developed in high fence a product called Core Infusion. Didn't have a name then, but we have since evolved that product and come quite a ways. Fortunately, there is quite a few more available natural ingredients, which anybody that knows me or knows what I do at Killer Food Plots, I really like to come in line with the body of the deer, or come in line with Mother Nature when it comes to fertilizing the soil with our Groganics fertilizer. We get so much more out of the plant, and we get so much more out of the plant for the deer and into the deer's body with regard to coming at it from a natural perspective, dealing with feeding the ruminant, helping to make sure that it's working at its peak operating performance. So we do that. Our Core Infusion is a 33% protein concentrated pellet. There's no fillers, there's no byproducts. We don't have like loose corn and things mixed into the bag. We save that for you to go ahead and buy that from your local mill or your local farm store or your local farmer, grown in your own community. Keep those dollars there. Don't pay an exorbitant amount of money to ship it across the country. And consequently, we have the high protein. We have a chelated mineral rate in the pellets, so it's giving them what they need every day. In addition to that, we have a full vitamin package. Certain vitamins are very important to the efficiency and health of the body of a deer. We also have 2 natural bacteria packs. One feeds the ruminant. It feeds the bacteria so they multiply within the stomach of the deer. So there's more of them to actually break down the food that they're consuming. Remember, we talked about how inefficient that cycle is and how quickly they discharge out the backside what they brought in from the front side. So it's really important to have those bacteria munching down and breaking down that food that's coming in. And then the second bacteria pack we have is made to extract microtoxins or negative bacteria that negative bacteria that deer are constantly inundated with, whether they're drinking in a mud hole, a pond, or rummaging through the leaves and such in the woods. They're constantly inundated with those things, and that can cause them to have a disruption or an interruption in their stomach, an upset stomach, cause diarrhea, dehydration. So it's important, it could cause them to get that like a little cold, and it's very important to get that out of their system as soon as possible so that they stay kind of above the line, if you will, in their daily health. So that in addition, that second natural bacteria pack also cleanses their system, and it cleans through the ruminant out the intestine, opening up the capillaries post-ruminant to make sure we maximize the absorption of what they have broke down to a usable form, to make sure we get as much of that into their body as possible to get that growth. And, we've got customers that have been calling us in the last few years. They're putting 35 to 50 inches of antler on their deer using the core infusion. And that's pretty profound. And, that's something you would expect to see in a high fence. And these are guys doing this out in the free range deer within their deer herd. So we're definitely doing something right there. I'm happy to be able to help people achieve that goal that they're going after, and having a healthy herd, well balanced. And for us, again, it's another tool in the overall habitat management and management of our health of our deer herd.
Yeah, I definitely think that feeding protein has its position, and the reason I'm saying that here is because I've talked to I don't know if you heard about it. I think it was 37 deer killed in Oklahoma this year that's all scored over 200 inches. And, Oklahoma's not necessarily considered a state you go to when you're seeking trophy whitetail. And this year kind of, I think, put us on the map for that. And a lot of these people that I've talked to that have harvested the deer or have talked to those people all mention that they were feeding protein. I wouldn't say all of them were, but a lot of them were feeding protein.
Yeah, protein is important, definitely in a deer's diet. It makes up 80% of their diet. It's more important than any other thing that they consume. It's got to be, but it's got to be a good digestible protein. There's a lot of products that have a lot of byproducts and fillers and different things out there. So definitely flip the bag around, look at the label, kind of get yourself educated, look at the differences. Also determine, what are you buying in the bag? I mentioned that we don't have all the corn and all the other stuff mixed in there. And, people would say, well, don't I have to blend that together because 33% protein is too high? Yeah, it definitely is. So you definitely want to mix our core infusion with, I like cracked corn because it's easier for the deer to digest and they can benefit more from it. But it's definitely mixing it nets about a 20% protein out of from the core infusion, and additionally, your fat content in a 50-50 mix is about 3.25%. But in the winter months, when you want to boost that fat, then you can add soybeans, roasted soybean or regular soybeans in with your cracked or shelled corn with the core infusion. And that core infusion goes a long way within that mix with all the digestive agents and the gut health. It really helps the deer to break down and utilize, again, that high fat content from your soybean as well as some additional protein. And then the corn helps to ultimately drop that protein level into that sweet spot, which is about 20%.
Well, Nick, I think that you have answered all the questions I've had to ask, man. You are very knowledgeable when it comes to this, and I really appreciate you taking your time out of your day to answer some of these questions I had.
Oh, you're welcome, Rob. Thank you for having me on, and look forward to talking more food plots with you and going through maybe more of the steps in our next interview.
So I don't know about you guys, but that definitely gets me pumped up and ready to get some land management / food plot / deer prep / whatever you want to call it, land BS up and going. So next weekend, the 21st, me and Josh are going to be doing some land, projects on one of the properties that we hunt on, and we're going to be doing a lot of hunting and filming and stuff on this year. So make sure you guys stay tuned in on next Saturday, because I'm definitely going to be doing some live video, and mostly just because it's probably going to be funny just to see what's going on. So Nick Percy, he is an awesome guy, and he has so much knowledge about this subject, and it's crazy. He's definitely going to be back on the podcast in the future, so if you have any questions you'd like me to ask him, make sure you let me know, and we'll get that figured out. So sorry if you guys hear a little bit of background noise throughout the podcast this week. Is because it was ridiculously windy here in Oklahoma, and if you're from Oklahoma, you know on Thursday of this week, which would have been, I think it's the 12th of April, it was ridiculously windy, and I tried my best to get it out, but if it's still there in the end when you're listening to it, I apologize. With all that being said, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, that like button, and check us out on YouTube, because there's going to be a lot of great content coming in the next few months, and I don't want you to miss out. So make sure you tune in next Saturday for the new episode of the Devoted Outdoorsman Podcast.